the biggest event of the Enactus calendar after the Enactus US National Championship is the Enactus World Cup. This year we are in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and this event is October 30th to November 2nd. This is when our national winners from each of our 35 countries comes together and they compete against each other on the impact of the social enterprises that they've begun during the year. We also have 4 global races that will occur during this event. So I wanted to share just a little bit about what's happening. Registration is open. The event is free to attend. The first day is the opportunity to see projects live. I don't know if this has ever been offered at a World Cup before, but I know many people are excited to see projects in the greater San Juan area. So it's a day trip with lunch to go out and see some of the amazing work that Puerto Rico students are doing. On October 31st, we have a welcome ceremony, the first round of competition, and the 77-second film festival. And on November 1st, we start global competitions. Let me jump down here. November 1st, we have the Global Goals Forum. We have our global competitions on climate, sustainable plant-based food, the Race to Feed the Planet, the One Race for Oceans, and our Race to Rethink Plastics. We also have an Impact of Collaboration session, and for the first time ever, a pitch session for 2 venture investors. That's a very exciting step forward for Enactus Ventures. And on November 2nd, the last day of the World Cup, we'll have the top 16, those are the semifinalists, and then later that day, the final 4, as well as the awards and ceremony for all of the winners during the World Cup. So we'd love you to join us in San Juan and just visit enactus.org/World Cup. So without further ado, I want to introduce our speakers for today. We're going to talk about supply chain, and this is something that all of us have heard so much about over the last 2 years, and actually much longer than that. The pandemic exacerbated some of the supply chain issues, but this is a big part of what Enactus partner companies and the world are focused on. So Nichole Wright joins us from BIC. She has 15 years of experience in this area and formerly worked for Walmart. Thank you for joining us, Nichole. We also have Erin Bergman. Erin is a professional at Walmart, and her focus area is recruiting the talent to drive the fleet. We've all heard about the challenges associated with not enough truck drivers out there, not enough trucks on the road, and Erin is going to share her expertise in that area with us today. And then John Hein is here from Polaris, and John has done a host of different roles and will be sharing his perspective as well. So I am going to stop sharing and start talking. I perhaps will start with John. And John, I wonder if you have a story you want to share about the best supply chain or logistics story you have from the last 2 years. We've heard a lot. Tell us what it's been like.
I used to joke as I gave some of the lectures to a couple different universities here about that 2020 was the worst year in supply chain history. And then I would cross that out and say, well, 2021 is the worst year in supply chain history. And most recently, I crossed that out and said 2022 it's one of the most challenging years in supply chain for us at Polaris. And the fact that we are still trying to ramp up and put our supply chain back in place to where it was in 2019. From that standpoint, it has been incredibly challenging and difficult, and a lot very similar to whack-a-mole. And some of the things that we did is we created supplier recovery teams. And those supplier recovery teams were teams that would actually travel to the supplier and give our expertise in supply chain to that supply base as well too. So help them with either trying to find labor or trying to figure out how to get more tooling, how to expedite some of their tier 2 type things from that perspective. Some of the things we did in new product introduction, which was a little bit more of a success story, I would say, is that we really worked to adjust some of the timing at our plants for some of the builds, and a lot of times did communicating on around that. We adjusted our tooling cash flow and how we did that process as well too, to try to preserve some of the money inside of Polaris and how we were sending out some of that capital. Be a lot more mindful in the capital dollars going out for tooling. We spend a tremendous amount of dollars every year on tooling for new product introduction, and so we came up with a process on how to do that, and helped share that with our supply base as well too. And it was a very big success for us and our supply base, because it guaranteed payments to them, as well as it helped us be much more mindful on the financial side.
Awesome. Nichole, I wonder if you have a story you want to tell of the tales of the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. John, I like your adage of whack-a-mole, because that's certainly what it has felt like over the past few years. So it's a great description of kind of what we've endured. I'll probably take my story back to when we first kind of rolled out into the new world of COVID. And at that time, I was in the retail space, and specifically electronics, which historically is an allocated inventory anyway, where your demand typically always exceeds your fulfillment. You have new item launches and there's not enough product based on the consumer demand that's out there in the market. So my team had already had some muscles in place as far as understanding how to put inventory in the right places, between in the box on the retail side, or do you lean into .com. When COVID first started, obviously there's a whole new set of rules as far as states were imposing restrictions on what retailers could sell, right? They were focused on consumable items. They were limiting, consumers going into stores and being able to buy electronics. So there was a lot of reaction that was happening. But if I could say one thing about just that entire experience, I think communication from the retail side with the suppliers was essential. I mean, it was constantly changing as far as what the makeup was, as far as what was available, the timing of when we were going to get that product, but having that visibility as far in advance as possible at that time really helped us think through all those different avenues of placement. Where do we put that? What states are being restricted right now? How do we lean into online? Just how do we put the inventory in the right places to make sure that we can reach the largest amount of consumers? Because there was definitely a demand as people shifted from being in the office to being at home, and that demand on monitors and laptops and whatever it was. But the goal was to reach as many consumers as possible in that space. It's a moving target every day.
Fascinating. So we had whack-a-mole. That sounds like a million-piece pickup or puzzle to put together to figure out how to move things to the markets that needed them most. Erin, how about you? What about on the talent acquisition side? What has the past 2 years been like for you?
Yeah, so I actually started in my role in August of 2020. So it was quite a time to start a new role in the supply chain industry. But I would reiterate what they said, certainly many challenges, but I think that out of challenges are born great new ideas and opportunities. And I'm really proud of the past 2 years and the way that our team has responded. A lot of great initiatives have been born out of this concerted effort between lots of different teams to grow our fleet. When I started in role, I think we had about 9,600 drivers, and we're just on the precipice of crossing the 13,000 mark, and are the second largest private fleet in the country. So tremendously proud of the growth in headcount, but that was driven through a lot of great initiatives. Two that I would call out as I'm most proud of would be a wage investment that we announced earlier this year. So our drivers in their first year of employment now make up to $110,000. And that's a tremendous investment impact to them personally and to their families. And so it's always great to be able to deliver news like that. The second program that I will call out, I'm really proud of, is our Associate to Driver program. That's something that we piloted last year, in which associates in our supply chain facilities that are warehouse workers can now earn their CDL license through our Live Better University program. We then train them to become professional drivers at Walmart. So in the span of 4 months, you're going from unpacking or loading a trailer to actually driving that trailer, which has presented tremendous growth opportunities for our associates.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, that leads me, actually is a great segue to my next question, which is, you know, it's a giant issue, but is there, are there any easy answers in the supply chain world to solve things? Erin, maybe I'll come back to you right away. You were able to offer employees more pay and to provide them a way to upskill. Are there other things you see in your world that our partners and others could kind of model after what you've been doing as far as finding drivers, retaining drivers, training drivers?
Yeah, there is a driver shortage that's well documented. The American Trucking Association is projecting that will only increase over the coming years. So definitely something that all private fleets and carriers are looking to get in front of. And on the talent side, I think first you have to stop. If you have a leaky bucket, right, you've got to stop it or you're never going to fill it. And so I think attrition is our primary focus to make sure that the associates that we have are happy in their role, fulfilled, that we're meeting their needs. And so that compensation package was certainly part of that. But we're really, intentional about listening to our drivers and what their pain points are, and then solving for them. So as an example, last week, we brought a driver from each of our offices across the country to our home office in Bentonville, where they had 2.5 days with our senior leaders, all the way up through our executive vice president of supply chain, to get a firsthand look at what the strategy is for the business, to make sure that they're, invested in that and aligned to it, give them some insight into the technology advancements we're working on to make their job easier, and then spend half a day just listening to them and getting feedback on, what can we do better, and make sure that we're addressing their needs. We also work as a cross-functional team. So I think that's definitely a great learning, especially the virtual environment we worked in over the past couple of years, is not to try to solve problems in isolation. So I have a group of folks that I partner with on a daily basis, from ops and HR and compliance, to make sure that we're solving these problems collaboratively, and I'm not just chasing one solution while they're chasing another. And that's really where the wage investment was born from, as well as other changes like our cell phone policy, which gives our drivers more time to talk to friends and family on the road. And then just making the job more appealing. Schedules is something that's a challenge in the industry. Drivers want to get home to their family every night. And as a mom of 2 young boys, I certainly understand that. And we need to make sure that we're giving them what they need while still meeting the needs of the business. So those are kind of the retention initiatives. But then thinking about the recruiting side of things, like I mentioned, that associate to driver program will become a key part of our staffing strategy, but also diversifying the pipeline. So for those of you that are familiar with the driving world, it tends to be dominated by men. We did see an increase during COVID, actually, primarily from the healthcare industry, of women entering the trucking industry. So now 13% of drivers are female. But you think about the opportunity there to bring more women in. Most actually enter at the age of 50 after their kids are grown and out of the house, and they have the flexibility to get out. So that's why that schedule is so important. But they're actually, a great talent, right? So it's not just about hiring women, it's because they're actually tremendous drivers. They're actually less likely to get into serious accidents than men are. So statistically speaking, they're safe drivers, and people that we want a part of our fleet. And then the last thing I would call out is just paying attention to what's going on in the news. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was passed this past year. There's been a lot of work done by the Department of Transportation to try to support the driver world. So there is a new bill that passed that gives commercial motor vehicle drivers younger than 21 the opportunity to cross state lines, which is new. Prior to that, they had to stay in their state, and depending on where you live, you cross state lines often, right? So that really restricts your ability to drive. So that's an apprenticeship program where there are certain guidelines put in place to ensure the safety of both the driver and the motoring public, but really exciting to see what we're doing at a federal level to support the driver shortage.
Fascinating. Love the data on women. It made me, and the age of women entering the driving world made me think about RVs or pull a rig. Which are you going to do, right, when your kids are out of the house? Nichole, how about you? This is a giant question, but is there an easy answer to the supply chain problem that you see from your seat?
The answer to that is no. So there's no easy answer, but certainly there's things that we can do to kind of minimize the impact. Kind of post-COVID, we're at this stage where we're trying to figure out what the new normal is, right? There was a lot of pantry loading, a lot of panic buying. So from my point of view, now being on the CPG side, after shifting away from retail and seeing kind of the entire supply chain, forecast accuracy is really where I spend a lot of my time, because forecast accuracy can influence every point of the supply chain. Understanding the demand of the retailers that I support and how that translates into fulfillment and essentially orders on my side. If we have an accurate forecast and we kind of see where the consumer is moving, we understand every point of that supply chain, whether it be warehouse capacity, understanding transportation capacity. John, you probably understand this, like raw materials all the way up to procurement. And that really can be, sometimes you're procuring raw materials 2, 3, 4 years in advance. It can even lead into capital investment discussions on, do we need to expand facilities? So there was a lot of shift that happened during COVID. And so now we're just in this place where we're trying to understand like what the new normal is, what is the consumer after, and what does that buying pattern look like from the retail side? And then how does that translate into our world on the CPG side? Because it's very easy to get into a bullwhip effect where you react to what the consumer is doing and overstock or overbuy or do all these things. And then when the consumer pulls back because of whatever reason, they pantry loaded or stimulus has ended, whatever those influences are, you end up in the opposite situation where maybe you've leaned in a little bit too heavy. So it's just really understanding again where the new state is with the consumer and how do we react to that on our side.
And Nichole, just a quick follow-up, because that sounds like reading 1,000 crystal balls and following a ton of insights. I mean, I think about what you've just been through with back to school, right? Huge customer demand, students back on campus, perhaps for the first time in a couple of years. They need all that stuff. They can't, they're not in mom's basement anymore. They're actually on campus, and just thinking about how many kind of things you have to keep track of. Do you have a giant dashboard or like 5 jumbotrons on your wall? How are you doing that?
Yeah, that would be great. That would make things a lot easier. But no, I mean, a lot of it is data-driven, insights-driven. We can pull from patterns pre-COVID. You can see a lot of similarities to years in like 2018, 2019. But there's a lot of adjustments that have to be made too, because consumers have changed what they like, right? They maybe are moving from one marker to another, right? And so that changes how you have to forecast that demand. But yeah, it's just a lot of data points that go into that equation. But like I said, the better we get at that, it really helps influence our accuracy upstream.
John, what would you say? You've got a complicated product offering with a lot of components. So you've got that, as Nichole was saying, the components coming in to manage and then getting that stuff out, and a seasonal customer as well.
Yes, I echo a lot of the stuff that Nichole said. A lot of the things that we see as well too, and that we're trying to do is around some of the historical stuff and digging into that. We use a lot of data analytical teams now, and that's some of the stuff that we hadn't done before. We're digging in deeper into our supply chain, which we may not have done before. We might have looked at our tier 1s and tier 2s. Now we're looking into tier 3s, tier 4s, and in some cases tier 5s and 6s, depending on where we're at on some of this, as we look upstream and what we're trying to do. A lot of it, again, like Nichole said, has historical patterns. Some of the stuff that we're looking at, this mirrors to a certain extent some of the things that we were seeing back in 2008, 9, and 10 for the housing crisis, of how we went into the housing crisis, but then also how we came back out of the housing crisis, and what were we doing from a consumer base and what were we buying at that time. And so those are some of the things that we're trying to model out, as well as one of the biggest things that I also say from this is that some of the stability comes through predictability. And so the more things that you can put into control, whether you're locking in long-term contracts or you're buying some of those raw materials a lot earlier or for a longer period of time, when we talk about, raw tube or resins or things like that too, it makes it much more predictable for us in the fact that we know we're going to have resins, so we know we can go make the plastics, right? Or we know we have tubes, so we know we can make the frames for our vehicles. So
I'm going to stay with you for a minute, John, and talk a little bit more about unpredictability. I mean, there's like that phrase, the only thing that stays the same is change. And, we've had gas prices go up and down. They've been down now for, I read a headline this morning, almost 100 days in a row. But inflation appears to be hitting gas prices. We've got, the war in Ukraine affecting global fuel and food. Lots of things that you have no control over affect your world on a daily basis. Weather, we're headed into winter. And I wonder how you think about, you were talking a little bit about that, putting more in your control, but for all those factors, I wonder if you have a sense of like, how much is under your control, like buying ahead, and then what percent is it? 50% that's uncontrollable, and that may be hard to gauge, but how do you manage the things that are out of control? Weather, hurricanes, wars, how does that work in your world? We all have some of it. It seems like you have more of it in your world.
There's a bit of that. I want Nichole's dashboard where she has about 90 things on there. I could use that because it seems like that at some time. And going back to what I previously said about whack-a-mole, every time we think or feel like we have some things in pretty good control, it seems to be one more thing that pops up that we, wasn't on for some reason on a risk radar somewhere. We expanded our risk radar out quite a bit in the year of 2020. We were watching, we'll say 5 or 6 different things, mainly financials and some stuff that's very typical to that. We expanded out through using some consultants and things like that. We're watching well over 25 different things right now on our risk radar, and that helps to at least give us some earlier indicators. It doesn't mean that we may, we don't 100% react to everything perfectly, but it at least gives us some earlier indicators, and it's changed our mentality of how we're doing that. Communication is one of the biggest things, and again, going back to what Nichole said on that one, communication is huge, and it's one of the things that we're always constantly talking to our suppliers and asking them to share things from a transparency basis too. And they've been much more transparent. We can't get that connector for the harness. What can we do? And so we try to jump in a bit too and help them out of, well, have you checked the spot market, or here's 5 other places that we know of that you might want to go and check and see if you can get those type of things to help keep them on track as well too. And it really has created this partnership with our supply base.
Nichole, you've got a big dashboard and a lot of crystal balls, but how are you trying to bring calm to an unpredictable environment?
Yeah, I think one of the things is definitely focus on the parts of your business that are most important. So if I think about in my world with an item assortment, certainly there's items that drive your business, and making sure that you kind of have a zero tolerance policy on availability in those items, right? Because consumers, if something isn't available, typically are going to trade into something. And so if there's, for example, top 5 items that drive the lion's share of my business, really leaning in and investing in those items and maybe increasing my weeks of supply that I would typically hold to ensure that I can continue to support those items into the retail space. Again, knowing that the consumer is probably they're out for a pen, they will trade into a pen, and making sure that we have that available for them. I think that's probably the largest thing. And then the other piece of it, I think, is really looking at your network and never assuming that it's as efficient as it can be. Always continuing to push and understand, am I leveraging my assets the most effective way possible? Am I consolidating my shipments effectively? Can I adjust timing of deliveries to make sure that I can consolidate shipments? Working with your retailers on, when your POs come in. There's definitely a timing of things. And so constantly looking at where there's maybe duplication or added expense, but just that constant evaluation of your network and making sure that you're leveraging your assets with the highest ROI and the best effectiveness.
Erin, how about you? People are unpredictable too.
Yeah.
How do you bring predictability to the human environment?
Yeah, I think part of it, Betsy, is just not letting yourself get caught up in all the things you can't control and focusing on what you can, which is kind of, the approach I try to take in prioritizing the impact we can make. So the impact that a driver has in Southern California may be different in the Chicago market. So ensuring that my priorities are aligned to the business's priorities and we're delivering where it matters. And then I think just having, like what Nichole said about, optimizing efficiencies, different perspective on the hiring side, but still very much true. So we went into a new applicant tracking system this year, being mindful of the capacity of my team and then growing it as needed, or leveraging support partners to make sure that we're able to keep up with the business need. So yeah, in general, I would say just staying focused and prioritizing.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about education. Enactus is an education organization, and you spoke to some of the things that you've innovated with around recruitment, training. For others, we have partners who are on the line who may contract with outside drivers and not have their own fleet or drivers. And we also have students who are running enterprises and don't have the access to resources you do. But I wonder, as far as education, that those pay levels may be bringing different people to the world of driving. What do you think when you look at the bigger world of recruitment and training drivers? We all want them to be safe and efficient. Where do you see that heading? There are all these driving schools that used to exist, and yet I've also read that many of them went out of business during COVID, creating more kind of constraints on supply chain. Where do you see this bigger environment of transportation headed?
Yeah, definitely during COVID, we saw a lot of closures as well as just temporary closures that really constricted the pipeline. But I think part of the challenge is that drivers used to leave for other driving positions, and that has really changed over the last few years, where they're leaving the industry altogether. And so I think not taking for granted that just because they're a driver today means they'll be a driver tomorrow, keeping them engaged and challenged and giving them other developmental opportunities within the company. There's a lot of people I've worked with at Walmart who started as a driver and now they're on our data and analytics team or our environmental health and safety team. So giving them visibility into, you can drive forever or you can come off the road at some point and move into a lot of other fantastic opportunities. But I think for us, we're fortunate to be the second largest employer, I think, in the world. And so we have this great internal pipeline within the walls of our company. And so not always being, we certainly want to bring in external talent as well, but also really mobilizing our internal population, giving them access to opportunities. And even if I would say another carrier doesn't have the means to do that internally, there's plenty of connections you can make in the industry with partner organizations that can help fill some of the resourcing gaps that may exist within your own organization.
Talk to me, I think Walmart may be innovating here too, but what about electric freight and delivery vans? As far as gas prices are going up, but hybrid may be a solution. Is that the case?
Yeah, so in 2020, Walmart actually set a goal to achieve zero emissions across our global operations by the year 2040. And you can imagine with a company of our size that that's a pretty steep challenge, but something that we're actively working on and won't be solved just by electric vehicles. I think that will be part of the solution. But, Nichole and John could speak better than I could to the journey that our products take to get to our front door. And so I think there will be different solutions across the supply chain and how we attack that. So right now we've been testing a variety of solutions, so electric, hydrogen, and natural gas options. We partnered with 2 high-tech companies earlier this year and announced that we're acquiring about 10,000 electric vehicles for our final mile delivery, which is really exciting. But we're still kind of testing and learning to see what works and what the right investment options are. But I think one of the advantages is being able to see what works well in different segments of the Walmart world. So Walmart Canada is actually the first major retailer in Canada to offer carbon neutral last mile delivery for e-commerce. So we can kind of learn from what our neighboring partners do and take that and implement here in the US as well.
And when you say that last mile delivery, you mean the truck that pulls up my driveway or the car would be an EV?
Yeah, exactly.
Or carbon neutral, maybe not an EV, but carbon neutral.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it becomes a little bit more challenging when you think, for example, we deliver to our stores in Alaska. So they're starting at a DC in Washington. And then it's what we call a team driver. So while you're driving, I'm sleeping, and then we switch and I drive while you sleep. So you think about an electric vehicle that needs time to sit at a charging station, right? And that means it's taking that efficiency off the road. We'll also have to match up to the Department of Transportation's regulations on how long those drivers can be driving. So there's a lot of puzzle pieces that have to fit together to make that all work. And I think from an industry perspective, that's really the concern is there the infrastructure in place to support the growth needed in the electric space? There's, I think, about 50,000 charging stations across the country as compared to 150,000 gas stations. So, it'll certainly be kind of a roadmap to get to a place where we can sustain that increased level of electric traffic.
Are there big rigs that are electric?
There are. So Tesla has a model. Walmart Canada made a commitment. They aren't actively, to my knowledge, producing those at the moment. But there has been some testing that we've done in Southern California as well with another manufacturer. But I think too, there's oftentimes bridge solutions to problems that are this challenging, right? So as you think about autonomous vehicles, adaptive cruise control, which improves fuel efficiency, and actually drone delivery. So I don't know, Nichole, I think you're in Northwest Arkansas, so you've probably seen or heard a drone near you, but we actually can order our lunch at some of our home office locations by drone, which is kind of unusual to walk outside and you see this big drone in your face dropping off your pizza or sandwich. But, I think it's just about diversifying the options that we're pursuing and figuring out what the right solutions are for the different parts of the supply chain.
Thank you so much for that. I know my alma mater has a bunch of robots that deliver food and deliver during the pandemic so that people didn't have to go to group, eateries to get their dorm food. The dorm food could come to them. Fascinating changes. Nichole, when you look at kind of this world of climate change and some of the commitments that companies are making as far as both climate effects on your work and then the climate goals that shareholders want, companies want to achieve, employees want to achieve. How does that show up for you in BIC and your supply chain work?
I think one thing, just kind of picking back on what Erin was saying, is with them being one of the largest fleets out there, we don't have our own fleet, so we procure our transportation. So one of the things that we'll be watching is to see what other carriers do, if they will follow the lead of Walmart and start to get into some of those spaces and what that would mean for us on our side. So it's definitely something that we're not as close to it as Erin is, but watching from an industry standpoint to see how it's going to affect the rest of the trucking industry.
Awesome. John, how about for you at Polaris?
Yeah, a lot of it, we're just looking at just every aspect and in different aspects that we haven't thought of before, such as pallets. How are pallets made? Where's the wood coming from? Everything as far as all of, those type of things. Truck, we don't own our own fleet either. We contract those pieces out as well. And just watching big companies such as Walmart and how they're handling some of their stuff is, and we follow suit with what they're doing too. So.
We're coming into where I'd like to ask the last question, and I wonder if we can talk about market forces in the supply chain. I know when there's no toilet paper on the shelf during early in the pandemic, or in my local grocery store, there wasn't seltzer. I'm like, that's water with some carbonation. How can there not be seltzer? Some of the things that happen in the supply chain world to me as a consumer are confusing. Then you read there's no CO2 to carbonate beverages. There's a shortage of even that. So the kind of ripple and domino effect in your world and in supply chain have amazed me during this period. And I'm wondering if you'll talk a little bit about market forces in the supply chain, and if you can look ahead and tell us we're headed into a big buying time for most consumers as we head into the holidays. And as we look ahead to 2023, what's in your crystal ball as far as kind of where the market's going to take us? John, will you start us off?
I can, sure. This is a challenging question. I can say it that way. And I know in 2020 we were concerned that we might see some tapering of people buying our vehicles and what we were trying to do. And we saw the exact opposite, where it took off since people were at home. Everybody was buying our vehicles, especially four-seaters and things like that as well too. That's sustained through 2021, 2022, and even going into 2023 and what we're forecasting out to our shareholders. So that's really nice to see some of those particular pieces as well. From looking at the overall market, obviously chips are a big thing. People want our vehicles to be much more like the vehicles that they drive. So they step out of their vehicle, they step into our vehicle. And the vehicles that we drive nowadays are very complex compared to the way they were 20, 30, 40 years ago, having multiple controllers inside of them. You mentioned the variable, cruise controls and things like that, all has controllers behind it and multiple chips and those type of things. And we're even monitoring and looking through things like, well, what are the how are people buying up the resources for wafers that even go into pieces of the chips, and starting to think about that as well too. So there's a lot of global dynamics that play into this, much more than maybe we even thought a few years ago. And it's very interesting to see some of the things that we find labor shortages in, where we thought we had labor in certain areas of the country as well too. We'll end up with labor shortages at a shock supplier or seat belts or tires or things like that too, which just wasn't anticipated when we went through and did our initial risk assessments. So
you're seeing a stable, it sounds like a great few run for Polaris as far as sales, and continued blips in the supply chain that will make your job interesting.
Yes, easily. Again, going back to striking through the years here, is I honestly thought we would start stabilizing out back in 2020, in 2022, and now that we're in 2022, I know it will be actually probably closer to even 2024. Not that we won't be missing parts or things like that, or can't do builds, but getting back to that more stable, where we have a handle on every single thing, and it's less of a whack-a-mole, right? It's maybe a couple of suppliers that are falling down versus 30 or 40.
All right, awesome. Nichole, we're headed into big buying season. I love my Rocketbook. I have my big pens in front of me. What do you see as far as what things look like for us in the short term as far as supply chain, and looking into 2023, both for BIC and for the rest of the consumer world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think from a consumer standpoint, things are, I hate to use the word normalizing, because I feel like you run the risk of saying that and then things are going to completely go haywire, but things are somewhat normalizing from a consumer standpoint, at least in my space, right? But I do know that, kind of tying back to the forecast accuracy conversation, there's still things that are out of our control. So we're trying to minimize, controlling what we control and minimize that impact, and really thinking as far upstream as possible. So that way we don't feel those effects downstream, but definitely starting to see some normalization in the market.
So I can get my Rocketbooks for holiday gifts this year.
Absolutely. And I love that you love that item.
I love
Great item.
Rocketbook. I have it right here on my desk. Yeah. Erin, how about for you? When we look at the human domain, what do you see short-term and long-term as far as getting drivers on the road, getting the other people that make the transportation system work, whether it's LA port workers or mechanics? How does that look to you in the short and long term?
Yeah, I think it's just, adapting to what associates or candidates want. I think we saw a lot of changes over the last couple of years outside of the driver space as well. People looking for more remote opportunities or flexibility in their work schedules, pursuing opportunities outside of what they were doing pre-pandemic. So I think really remaining focused on what's important to our associates and candidates, and that we're meeting their needs. And I think that I guess I would say the industry as a whole, outside of the talent aspect, is why growing the fleet has been such an important part of our supply chain strategy, because it gives us the ability to weather the ebbs and flows of product demands by having the ability to shift drivers onto grocery work if that's really important right now, or to general merchandise if that's what's spiking at the moment. So, my job is to just continue to enable the business to deliver for our customers.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for your insights. I certainly learned a lot. I did not see any questions in the chat, but I want to pause and see if anyone has a question for our panel before we have a few words from Marty and close. Any questions for our panel that we should field? All right, well then I'm going to hand off to my colleague, Marty, and let Marty LeGrand say a few words. Marty?
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Betsy, for moderating, and a special thanks to Erin, Nichole, and John for leading a really good dialogue. The supply chain world is so big. You think about truck drivers and how important they are within the world, and then your roles of getting the products, and they're not all here, they're not all based here in the US, so you have to work in a global market, which Enactus certainly is. So we're grateful for your time today, and look forward to putting this presentation out on our website. It is sponsored by Regis Corporation and Riches. They are both long-term and active supporters. Riches Corporation, which is based in Minnesota, is the beauty industry's global leader in beauty salons and cosmetology education. That's a hard two words to use together. The company franchises, owns, and holds ownership interest in more than 5,700 locations worldwide. Rich Products, which is based in Buffalo, home of the Bills, unfortunately, is a global competitor in food categories that span cakes and desserts and breads, pizza, seafood appetizers, snacks, gluten-free, plant-based items, just to name a few. Both companies have been partners for 23 years after starting their partnership with Enactus in 1999, and both are committed to continuing their partnership well into the future. For them, supporting next-gen leaders that has never been more important, and the Enactus mission has never been more critical. Both Regis and Riches share and hold in the highest regard the Enactus values of integrity, passion, innovation, and collaboration. In leading collaboration, please join us each month for the Enactus Partner Summit Series, and please invite your colleagues to join us so they can get to know the passion, and the power that is Enactus. Take a moment to mark your calendar for the next Partner Summit Series, which I think you slide there. Nope. One back. There you go. The next Partner Summit series, which is October 19th, 2022 at 11 Eastern Time. It's DEI in action. You could see the partners, or I'm sorry, the panelists that are planned to be there. This is actually a redo of a series that we did in May of 2021. So we're going to get an update from Kelvin and Dr. Dale and Kim and Rob to talk about what's changed since May of 2021. We do have 2 other Partner Summit series planned for November 16th, where the topic will be customer retention, and December 14th, which is going to be on Echo Business. We actually will have a alumni on that, speaking about one of our kind of our legacy projects around mattress recycling. So that will be one of the panelists in December. Excuse me. At all of our partner summits, you can expect some interesting topics with knowledgeable guest panelists just like today. So on behalf of our Partner Summit series partners, Rich Products and Regis Corporations, who could not be here today, thank you all for attending today.
Thank you.
Have a great day.